The chamber goes silent the moment the council speaker turns to face me. I am the only human standing in a room built for bodies twice my size, and every eye in that circle, some with pupils shaped like slits, some glowing faint blue, is locked on me now. The speaker's voice booms through a translator implant clipped to my ear, and the words land like a closing door. Disarm your fleets, surrender your drive technology, accept permanent observation status. You have 7 days. I do not flinch. I have trained for years not to flinch, but my hands, folded behind my back, tighten until my knuckles ache. 7 days. They say it so easily, as if humanity is a child being sent to its room, as if 60 years of silence from Earth meant we spent that time sitting still. My name is Daniel Marsh. I am the senior human liaison to the Galactic Council, and I have spent the last 4 years in this station, smiling through insults dressed as diplomacy, nodding through meetings where my species is discussed, like a specimen, rather than a people. Today, for the first time, I let my smile disappear. The Council is made up of 12 member species, each one older than human civilization by thousands of years. They call themselves the Elder Races. They built the Great Trade Lanes, wrote the laws that govern 1,000 star systems, and decided long ago that any species too young, too fast, too unpredictable, needed to be watched rather than welcomed. Humanity earned that label the day we made first contact and refused to kneel. The speaker's name is Threl Kaziun, a delegate from a species that resembles tall reeds of pale stone, moving without visible joints, his voice always calm no matter what he says. He tilts his head toward me now, and I recognize the look. It is pity. It is the look you give something you believe cannot possibly survive what comes next. You should be grateful for the terms offered, he says. Lesser proposals were considered. I keep my voice level, though my pulse is hammering under my collar. On whose authority does this council decide the fate of a sovereign species without a vote from that species' own government? I ask. A murmur ripples through the chamber, not because my question is bold, but because it is beneath their notice. A delegate from the reptilian SAR cluster hisses something I do not need translated to understand as mockery. Another delegate, one of the insectile Vral, clicks its mandibles in what I have learned is their version of laughter. Threl raises one long hand, and the chamber quiets again. Humanity has no standing to question council authority, he says. Your species has existed among the stars for less than a century. You have no colonies beyond your own solar system, no fleet capable of challenging even our smallest patrol group, and a history of violence that predates your own written records. The terms are generous. Accept them. I feel something cold settle behind my ribs. Not fear, something closer to certainty. I think of every briefing I received before stepping onto this station, every encrypted transmission from Earth Command that told me almost nothing and asked me to trust that silence meant purpose, not weakness. I think of the words my superior gave me the night before I left home, delivered so quietly I almost missed them. Whatever they demand, do not agree to anything. Buy time. We are not what they think we are. I did not fully understand those words then. Standing here now, watching Threl's calm, unbothered face, I begin to understand. I will transmit your terms to Earth, I say, and my voice does not shake. But I want it recorded, formally, that humanity was given no seat in the drafting of this ultimatum, no chance to negotiate, and no explanation beyond the assumption that we are lesser. Threl's stone-like face shows the closest thing to amusement I have seen from his species. Record it if it comforts you, Ambassador Marsh. Words change nothing. In 7 days, your world either accepts our terms or the Council authorizes collective sanction against your species. I imagine you understand what that means. I do understand what it means. It means every trade lane humanity has fought to access gets sealed. It means every allied species still willing to speak with us gets pressured into silence. It means, if pushed far enough, a combined fleet from 12 advanced civilizations turning toward a solar system that, as far as this council believes, still relies on primitive engines and untested defenses. I bow my head slightly, not out of respect, but because I need a moment where my face is hidden from their censors. In that moment, I allow myself something I have not allowed in years. I allow myself to almost smile. They have no idea. I turn and walk from the chamber, my boots echoing against a floor built from a mineral no human hand mined, past delegates who barely glance at me because they have already decided how this ends. Behind me, I hear Threll's voice continue the session, moving on to other business, as if humanity's entire future was a minor line item already resolved. Outside the chamber, my aide is waiting. Her name is Grace Bishop, young, sharp-eyed, the kind of officer who reads a room before she reads a report. She falls into step beside me without a word until we are alone in the corridor leading to our shuttle bay. "How bad?" she asks quietly. "7 days," I say. "Disarm, surrender the drive tech, accept observation status." Grace exhales slowly through her nose. "That is not an ultimatum, that is a leash." I glance at her. "Send the encrypted packet to command the moment we are back aboard the shuttle. Full transcript, full delegate list, my formal objection on record. And Grace, mark it priority 1. I want Earth to see this before the hour is out." She nods, already tapping something into the slate on her wrist, but I catch the flicker of worry crossing her face before she smooths it away. "Sir," she says, "if they refuse the terms, and the Council actually authorizes a combined fleet, we do not have the ships to hold a line against that. Our defense grid barely covers Earth and Mars. We would be facing 12 fleets built over thousands of years." I think again of the words my superior gave me before I left. "Buy time. We are not what they think we are. I do not know everything Earth has built in the silence of the last 60 years. Nobody outside the highest levels of command does, not even me, and I have spent my life in service to this mission. But I know enough to trust the instruction I was given, and I know enough about my own people to understand one thing clearly. Humanity does not build slowly and quietly for 6 decades without a reason. We follow protocol," I tell Grace, and I let a small measure of confidence creep into my voice, not for her benefit alone, but because I need to believe it myself. "We transmit the terms. We wait for Earth's answer. And Grace, whatever that answer is, I do not think it will be the one this council expects." She studies me for a moment, searching my face the way she always does when she suspects I know more than I am saying. I do not know more, not really, not the specifics, but I know the shape of a lie when the council tells one, and I know the shape of quiet confidence when my own government gives it. Threll called us primitive. He called our fleet incapable of challenging even a small patrol group. He said this while sitting inside a station built on assumptions 6 decades old, assumptions frozen the day humanity stopped answering council hails and started building in silence. We board the shuttle, and as the station shrinks behind the viewport, I allow myself to think about what might be waiting on the other side of those 7 days. I think about Threll's calm, unbothered voice, telling me that words change nothing, and I wonder how that calm will hold when humanity finally answers. The shuttle's comm system chimes as we clear the station's outer ring, and Grace looks up sharply. "Command wants a live channel," she says. "They want to speak with you directly, now." I sit forward, my heart beginning to pound in a way it has not since I first arrived on this station. Direct contact from Earth Command, unscheduled, immediate, is not standard procedure. It has never happened in 4 years of my posting. "Patch it through," I say. The screen flickers, and a voice I recognize, calm and measured, fills the cabin. "Ambassador Marsh, we received your transmission. The Council's terms have been reviewed at the highest level." I wait, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. "Return to the station in 7 days. The voice continues. "Deliver Earth's response to the full Council Assembly, in person, exactly as instructed." "And the response?" I ask. There is a pause on the line, brief but heavy, the kind of pause that carries more weight than any words that follow it. "You will know when they know, Ambassador. Prepare yourself. This will not be the meeting you expect." The channel closes, and I sit in silence as the shuttle carries us back toward the station I just left, back toward a countdown that no longer feels like a threat hanging over my people, but something closer to a fuse already lit. Grace watches me, waiting for an explanation I do not have. 7 days, I say quietly, more to myself than to her. 7 days until the Galactic Council learns exactly what humanity has been building while they weren't watching. Outside the viewport, the station glitters against the dark, ancient, and certain of its own power, utterly unaware that the countdown it just began was never really about surrender at all. The delegates who mocked me today will remember this moment. I intend to make certain of it. For now, though, all I can do is wait, and trust that the silence my people kept for 60 years was never weakness. It was preparation. And in 7 days, the Galactic Council is going to learn precisely what that preparation was for. 60 years is a long time to keep a secret from beings who have watched the stars for 10,000. I think, as the shuttle docks and the station's cold light washes over us again, that the Council is about to learn just how long humanity can wait, and just how quietly we can build, when we finally decide the waiting is over. The alarm on my private terminal wakes me before the station's morning cycle even begins, a soft red pulse that means only one thing, a priority message from Earth, marked for my eyes alone. I am out of my bunk before I am fully awake, keying in the 6-digit clearance code with fingers that still remember the sequence even half asleep. The message is not text. It is a live feed request, scheduled for exactly 4 hours from now, and attached to it is a single line from Earth Command that makes my stomach tighten. Full briefing authorized. You are cleared for disclosure level Omega. Prepare to receive. I have never seen the word Omega attached to a clearance level in 4 years of service. I did not know it existed. Grace is already awake when I reach the small galley we share with 2 other human staff aboard the station. Her hair still damp from the shower, a mug of dark coffee in her hand that she has not touched. She sees my face and sets the mug down. What happened? She asks. Earth is opening something called Disclosure Level Omega, I say. 4 hours. Full briefing. Her eyebrows rise. I have never heard that term either. Neither had I, until 10 minutes ago. We spend the next 4 hours preparing the secure briefing room at the far end of our small embassy wing, a space shielded against every known form of surveillance the Council possesses, though I have started to wonder, given everything I do not know about my own government's capabilities, whether that shielding is even necessary anymore. Perhaps Earth has already assumed the Council cannot touch what we choose to hide. When the feed finally opens, it is not a single officer speaking to me the way command transmissions usually work. It is a full council of Earth's own, faces I recognize from years of briefings, and faces I have never seen before, seated in a room that looks nothing like the modest command centers I remember from my training days. Behind them, through a wide viewport, I can see something that makes my breath catch, a shipyard in orbit around a world that should not have one, vast, humming with light, larger than anything I believed humanity possessed. Ambassador Marsh, the woman at the center of the table, says, her voice calm but carrying an authority that fills the small room even through the screen. My name is Fleet Admiral Isla Winters. I command what you are about to learn exists. What I am going to show you has been kept from every human outside a very small circle for 60 years, including you, including most of Earth's own government. You are being brought in now because in 7 days you will stand in front of the Galactic Council and deliver Earth's answer, and you need to understand what that answer means before you speak it. I sit very still, my hands flat on the table in front of me, bracing myself without knowing exactly what I am bracing for. Admiral Winters continues, and behind her, screens flicker to life showing images that rearrange everything I believed about my own species. 61 years ago, after first contact ended the way it did, with the Council dismissing humanity as unworthy of formal alliance and placing us under a trade quarantine that strangled our access to advanced technology, Earth's government made a decision. We stopped asking for permission to grow. The screens show early images, grainy at first, of small orbital stations, modest shipyards, the beginnings of something I recognize from history lessons as the earliest attempts at independent Terran engineering. But the images do not stay modest. They accelerate, decade by decade, station by station, until the shipyards stretch across images of Jupiter's moons, until fleets of vessels, unlike anything the Council has ever tracked, take shape in dry docks larger than cities. "We built in the dark," Admiral Winters says, "because the Council's own trade laws gave us no other choice, and because we understood something the Council never accounted for. They believed isolating us would keep us weak. Instead, it gave us privacy. No Council observers, no trade inspections, no oversight of what happens inside a solar system they decided was not worth watching closely once we stopped asking for their approval. I think of Threll's voice in the chamber, calling humanity primitive, calling our fleet incapable of challenging even a small patrol group. I think of the certainty in his stone-like face, and I begin to understand exactly how wrong that certainty is. How, I ask, my voice quieter than I intend, how did we build all of this without them noticing? A man beside Admiral Winters leans forward, introduced to me only as Dr. Callum Ashworth, chief architect of what they call the Meridian Drive program. His eyes are tired in the way of someone who has spent decades awake more than asleep. "The Council's sensor networks are old," he says, "older than most of their member species care to admit. They rely on drive signatures they cataloged centuries ago, and they assume any species without a Council-registered engine design is not worth tracking closely. We spent the first 20 years reverse engineering fragments of technology recovered during first contact, pairing it with our own physics, and the result is a drive system that does not register on their scanners the way they expect propulsion to register. To their instruments, for a long time, we simply were not there." Grace, seated beside me, finally speaks, her voice tight with something between disbelief and quiet wonder. "How many ships?" she asks. Admiral Winters does not blink. "Enough," she says. "Enough that in 7 days, when you deliver Earth's answer to that ultimatum, you will not be speaking as a representative of a defenseless species asking for mercy. You will be speaking as a representative of an empire the Council does not yet know exists." The word empire settles over me like a physical weight. I have spent 4 years as a diplomat for a nation, a solar system, a modest alliance of human colonies. I have never once used the word empire to describe what I represent, because until this moment, it was never true. "Why tell me now?" I ask. "Why not before I ever set foot on that station?" "Because until this ultimatum," Admiral Winters says, "there was no need for the Council to know what we had become. Diplomacy bought us decades of quiet growth, but an ultimatum demanding disarmament and surrender of technology is not something we can quietly ignore. It requires an answer loud enough that no member of that Council will ever again mistake silence for weakness." The screens shift again, and this time I see something that steals the breath from my lungs entirely. Rows upon rows of vessels, sleek, dark, humming with a kind of controlled power I have no framework to measure, stretched across images of shipyards spanning 3 planets and countless orbital platforms. I count until I lose count, until the numbers stop meaning anything except overwhelming scale. "This is the Terran fleet," Admiral Winters says quietly, and for the first time since the feed opened, I hear something like pride beneath her calm authority. Built in silence, crewed by volunteers who understood exactly what we were preparing for, and ready to move on my order the moment your response is required. I lean back slowly, trying to reconcile the man I was 7 hours ago, a diplomat bracing for humanity's surrender, with the man sitting here now, being told his species has quietly built something the Council's oldest members have never imagined possible. "What do I say to them?" I ask, "when the 7 days end? What is Earth's answer?" Admiral Winters's expression does not change, but something in her eyes sharpens. "You will tell them exactly what they ask to hear," she says. "You will tell them Earth has considered their terms carefully. And then," she says, and I catch the faint edge of something almost like satisfaction in her voice, "you will tell them to look outside their windows, because our answer will already be arriving." The feed cuts, and I am left sitting in the shielded silence of the briefing room, Grace beside me equally speechless. Both of us staring at screens gone dark, trying to absorb 60 years of secrets delivered in a single afternoon. I think of every meeting I sat through in this station, every insult disguised as diplomacy, every moment Threll and the other delegates looked at me with barely concealed pity, certain they understood exactly what humanity was, and exactly how little threat we posed. They had no idea what patience we were capable of. They had no idea what silence, given 60 years and a reason, could become. Grace finally breaks the quiet between us, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir," she says, "do you think they suspect anything?" I think of Threll's calm face, his certainty, his casual dismissal of a species he believed he understood completely. "No," I say, "I do not think they suspect a single thing." The next 3 days pass in a blur of preparation. Earth sends fragments of the plan, never the whole picture at once, each transmission arriving through channels so heavily encrypted that Grace jokes we could hide a moon inside the data packets and no one would notice. I learned that the fleet Admiral Winters showed me is only the first wave. Behind it, positioned along routes the Council has never bothered to monitor, sit reserve formations, supply lines, and something Dr. Ashworth calls a relay network, capable of moving orders across a solar system faster than any Council communication array in existence. I spend my nights studying star charts I am only now allowed to see, watching quiet dots representing human vessels scattered across positions that, until 3 days ago, I believed were empty space. I begin to understand the shape of what Earth built, while the Council looked elsewhere, distracted by older rivalries, older wars, older certainties about which species mattered and which did not. On the 4th day, Grace finds me still awake in the briefing room, charts glowing faintly across the table between us. "You have not slept," she says. "I cannot," I admit. Every time I close my eyes I see Threll's face, so certain, so calm, and I think about what happens the moment that calm breaks. Grace sits across from me, quiet, for a long moment. "Do you think we are doing the right thing?" she asks, waiting until the last possible second to reveal what we have. I consider the question carefully, because it deserves a careful answer. "I think the Council gave us no other choice," I say finally. "They did not ask us to disarm because they feared us. They asked because they never imagined we could become something worth fearing. The moment we show them otherwise, on our own terms, in our own time, is the only moment that matters." Grace nods slowly, though I can see the tension has not fully left her shoulders. "And if they refuse to believe it, even when they see it," she asks, "if they choose to fight, rather than accept that humanity has changed?" I do not have a clean answer for that question, and I do not pretend to. I only know that in 3 days, standing in a chamber built for beings who consider my species an afterthought, I will speak the words Earth has prepared for me, and somewhere beyond that chamber's viewport, an empire humanity spent 60 years building in silence will finally answer for itself. Outside the viewport of the embassy wing, the station continues its slow rotation against the endless dark, delegates moving through its corridors, unaware that somewhere beyond their sensor range, an empire they dismissed as primitive has spent 6 decades preparing an answer they are not ready to hear. 3 days remain. I intend to spend every one of them ready. The chamber is louder than usual when I arrive, filled with the low hum of a dozen species exchanging final words before the session begins, and every delegate turns to watch me walk to my place at the edge of the circle. 3 days of waiting have ended. This is the moment Earth's answer either steadies humanity's future or shatters it, and I feel the weight of that possibility pressing against my chest with every step across the chamber floor. Threll stands at the center podium exactly where I left him, hands folded, expression unreadable in the way only a being who has never once feared consequences can manage. He watches me approach with something close to satisfaction, as if my presence alone confirms everything he expected. "Ambassador Marsh," he says, his translated voice carrying easily across the chamber. 7 days have passed. The Council awaits Earth's formal response. I stand at my place, and for a moment I let the silence stretch, not out of hesitation, but because Admiral Winters's instructions were precise, and precision matters now more than ever. I glance at the small chronometer embedded in my sleeve, counting down the final seconds Earth gave me before I was cleared to speak. Earth has considered your terms carefully, I say, and my voice carries further than I expect in the wide chamber. We reject them. The murmur that follows is immediate, dismissive laughter from the Vral delegate, a hiss from the Sajar cluster, the kind of noise a room makes when it believes it has just heard something foolish rather than something dangerous. Threll's expression does not change, though I notice the faintest narrowing of whatever passes for his eyes. You reject a council ultimatum, he repeats slowly, as though testing whether the words make more sense spoken aloud. Ambassador, I would remind you that rejection carries consequences your species is not prepared to survive. I hold his gaze steadily. Earth is aware of the consequences you believe this rejection carries, I say. We invite the Council to look outside the station and reconsider that belief for itself. For a moment, nothing happens. Threll's mouth, or the narrow ridge that serves as one, curves into something almost like amusement, the kind reserved for a threat he considers empty. Around the chamber, other delegates shift, exchanging glances, some amused, some faintly curious, none of them alarmed. And then the alarms begin. They start low, a soft tone rippling through the chamber's ambient systems, barely noticeable at first, easy to dismiss as a minor system fluctuation. But within seconds the tone sharpens, rising in pitch, and I watch the confident expressions around the circle begin to falter one by one as translated warnings scroll across data panels built into the chamber walls. Unregistered vessels detected. Multiple contacts. Signature unknown. Threll turns toward the nearest panel, and for the first time since I have known him, I see something crack in that endless, practiced calm. His long fingers hover over the display, scrolling through readings that clearly do not match anything his sensors expect to find. That is not possible, he says quietly, more to himself than to the chamber. These signatures do not correspond to any registered species. The mass readings alone would require propulsion technology beyond anything catalogued in Council records. I say nothing. I do not need to. Admiral Winters told me this moment would speak for itself, and watching Threll's composure unravel in real time, I understand exactly what she meant. The chamber's massive viewport, usually displaying nothing but the calm scroll of distant stars, shifts as the station's automated systems reroute visual feeds to match the sensor alerts. And there, spreading across the dark in perfect silent formation, ship after ship after ship, translates into visible space, hundreds of them, sleek and dark, arriving with a precision that leaves no trace of the violent energy flashes the Council's own fleets produce when entering a system. The chamber falls utterly silent. I have seen the images Admiral Winters showed me. I have studied the star charts, memorized the formation patterns, prepared myself as much as anyone could prepare for this moment. But nothing compares to standing in that chamber, watching delegates who have spent millennia, believing themselves untouchable, stare out at a fleet none of them can explain, none of them can identify, and none of them can currently outmatch. Threll turns back to me slowly, and for the first time, I see something in his expression I never expected to witness: uncertainty. Ambassador Marsh, he says, his voice noticeably quieter than before. What is the meaning of this deployment? I straighten, and I let myself finally say the words Earth prepared for exactly this moment, words I have carried inside me for 3 sleepless nights. That is the Terran fleet, I say, built by humanity over the last 60 years, entirely within our own solar system, using technology developed independently of Council oversight because your trade quarantine gave us no other path forward. We did not build it to conquer. We built it because your Council decided long ago that humanity was not worth watching closely, and in that neglect, you gave us exactly the privacy we needed to grow into something you failed to anticipate. The Vral delegate who laughed only minutes earlier now sits utterly still, mandibles frozen mid-motion. The Shar cluster's hissing has gone silent entirely. Around the chamber, delegate after delegate turns from the viewport to stare at me, and for the first time in 4 years of service, I do not see condescension in a single one of their expressions. I see something closer to fear, carefully restrained, but unmistakably present. You claimed our fleet could not challenge even your smallest patrol group. I continue, holding Threll's gaze. I would ask the Council to reconsider that assessment now. Threll opens his mouth as if to respond, but no words come. Behind him, I notice several delegates already pulling private data slates close, fingers moving rapidly, transmitting messages I suspect are not meant for the formal record. A new voice cuts through the tension, sharp and unfamiliar, belonging to a delegate I do not recognize, seated near the back of the circle, representing one of the smaller council member species I have rarely interacted with directly. This is a declaration of war, the delegate says, his translated voice edged with panic rather than authority. The council must respond immediately, mobilize the combined fleet, show these humans the true extent of our power before this show of force becomes something worse. I turn toward him, and I let my voice carry the calm certainty Admiral Winters modeled for me 3 days ago. Earth has made no declaration of war, I say. Our fleet has taken no aggressive action, fired no weapon, threatened no vessel, and violated no established trade route. We have simply arrived, visibly, undeniably, to demonstrate that the terms of your ultimatum were built on an assumption that no longer holds true. Humanity is not a species to be disarmed. We are a species prepared to negotiate as equals, and we intend to be treated as such from this moment forward. The chamber erupts into overlapping voices, delegates speaking over one another in a dozen languages at once, translated fragments colliding into a wall of noise that the chamber's systems struggle to separate into coherent threads. I catch pieces, demands for immediate council session, calls for verification of the fleet's capabilities, at least one voice arguing that the entire deployment must be some kind of elaborate illusion. Threll raises both hands, and though his composure has clearly been shaken, decades of practiced authority still carry enough weight to eventually quiet the room. He turns to me, and something in his expression has shifted entirely from the pity he wore 7 days ago into something far more careful. "Ambassador Marsh," he says slowly, "if this fleet exists as you claim, and its capabilities match what our sensors currently suggest, then the Council requires immediate verification before any further discussion can proceed." I assume Earth anticipated this request. I allow myself the smallest measure of satisfaction, though I keep my expression carefully neutral. Earth anticipated every request the Council might make, I say. Admiral Isla Winters, commander of the Terran fleet, is prepared to speak directly with this chamber, if the Council is willing to extend the same courtesy it demanded of humanity only 7 days ago. Threll hesitates, glancing toward the viewport where the fleet remains motionless, patient, undeniable. Around him, other delegates exchange uncertain looks, and I recognize the moment for what it is, the first crack in an authority that has stood unquestioned for 10,000 years, now forced to reckon with a species it dismissed as beneath serious consideration. "Very well," Threll says finally, his voice noticeably subdued. "The Council will hear from your Admiral." I nod, and as the chamber's communication systems begin the process of opening a direct channel, I glance once more toward the viewport, toward the silent, patient fleet hanging in the dark beyond the station, and I think of every moment over the last 4 years when I stood in this exact chamber and swallowed insults because I had no other choice. That silence is over now. The channel opens, and Admiral Winters's voice fills the chamber, calm, measured, carrying the same quiet authority I heard 3 days ago in the briefing room, but sharper now, aimed directly at beings who have never once had to answer to humanity for anything. "Members of the Galactic Council," she begins, "my name is Fleet Admiral Isla Winters, commander of the Terran fleet currently positioned at the edge of this station. I understand you have questions regarding the nature of this deployment. I am prepared to answer them, provided the Council understands one thing clearly before we proceed. Humanity did not arrive here to threaten this station or its member species. We arrived to correct an assumption that has cost my people 60 years of unequal treatment, and I intend to make certain that assumption never resurfaces again." The chamber remains silent, every delegate listening, and I watch Threll's expression settle into something I have never seen him wear before, the careful, measured attention of someone finally forced to treat humanity as an equal rather than a subject. Admiral Winters continues, her voice steady even as the weight of her words settles over the chamber. 7 days ago, this council demanded that humanity disarm, surrender its technology, and accept permanent observation status, based entirely on an assessment that was decades out of date. We do not intend to comply with those terms. Instead, we invite the Council to negotiate new terms, ones that reflect the reality currently visible outside this station's viewport, terms built on equal standing rather than assumed superiority. Threll finally finds his voice again, though it carries none of the confidence it held 7 days ago. And if the Council refuses these new terms, he asks. There is a pause on the channel, brief but heavy, and when Admiral Winters speaks again, her voice carries no threat, only quiet certainty. Then the fleet you see remains exactly where it is, she says, patient, undeniable, until the Council decides that equal standing is preferable to indefinite uncertainty. Humanity has waited 60 years for this conversation, Delegate Threll. We are prepared to wait a little longer, if that is what it takes for the Council to finally see us clearly. The channel falls silent, and I stand in the center of that ancient chamber, watching delegates who once looked at me with pity, now searching each other's faces for some plan, some strategy, some path forward that does not involve acknowledging what has just become undeniably true. Humanity is no longer waiting for permission to exist among the stars. We have already arrived, and nothing said in this chamber today will change that fact. I glance toward the viewport one final time, toward the silent fleet holding its patient formation against the endless dark, and for the first time in 4 years, standing in that chamber built for beings who believe themselves untouchable, I do not feel like a diplomat pleading for mercy. I feel like the representative of an empire finally being seen. The formal session ends without resolution, Threll adjourning the chamber with a stiffness that betrays how badly the last hour unsettled him, and delegates scatter through the station's corridors in small, urgent clusters rather than the usual unhurried pace I have grown used to over 4 years. I remain near the chamber entrance longer than necessary, watching the fractures spread in real time, and Grace finds me there, her expression somewhere between relief and disbelief. I did not think it would happen this fast, she says quietly. Neither did I admit. I expected posturing, delays, perhaps a formal request for extended verification. I did not expect the entire chamber to unravel within a single hour. Grace glances down the corridor, where 2 delegates from opposing council factions, species that have maintained a cold rivalry for centuries according to the briefings I studied years ago, now stand close together, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, clearly no longer concerned with maintaining appearances in front of each other. They are already choosing sides, she says. I watch the same scene, and I understand exactly what she means. The council I stood before 7 days ago presented itself as a unified authority, 12 species speaking with one voice, bound by shared history and shared purpose. But standing here now, watching alliances shift and reform in the space of an hour, I see the truth Admiral Winters hinted at during our briefing. The Council was never as unified as it appeared. It was held together by the assumption that no member species would ever need to challenge that unity directly, an assumption humanity just shattered beyond repair. A voice calls my name from down the corridor, and I turn to find a delegate approaching alone, someone I recognize but have rarely spoken with directly, a representative from the Athari Concord, a species whose territory borders 3 separate trade routes critical to their economy. Her name, translated as closely as the language allows, is Delegate Senna Vorith, and I remember her from previous sessions as someone who rarely spoke unless the matter directly concerned her people's interests. Ambassador Marsh, she says, her voice noticeably quieter than the confident tone she used in prior sessions. May I speak with you privately? Grace glances at me, and I give her a small nod, watching her step back to give us space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Delegate Vorith waits until Grace has moved a respectful distance before continuing. The Athari Concord did not support the harshest terms of this ultimatum, she says quietly. Several of our senior representatives argued for a more measured approach, direct negotiation rather than demands, but we were overruled by the larger factions, who insisted humanity required a firm hand. I want you to understand that not every member of this council shares the assumptions Delegate Threll expressed. I study her carefully, remembering every moment over the last 4 years when this same delegate sat silently through sessions where I was mocked, offering no support, no objection, nothing beyond careful neutrality. I remember it clearly, I say, keeping my voice even. I also remember that silence. Delegate Voreth. Neutrality in the face of an unjust demand is still a choice. She does not flinch from the observation, though something in her expression tightens. You are correct, she admits, and I am not here to ask forgiveness for that silence. I am here because the Athari Concord's economy depends heavily on trade routes that pass near human territory, routes that could be severely disrupted if this situation escalates into open conflict. I am asking, directly and without pretense, whether Earth would be willing to guarantee the safety of Athari trade vessels, independent of whatever terms the broader council eventually accepts. I recognize the request for exactly what it is, not diplomacy born of principle, but self-interest dressed carefully in diplomatic language. And yet, listening to her, I feel none of the anger I expected to feel toward a delegate who spent years watching humanity endure condescension without ever once speaking against it. I feel something closer to quiet vindication, watching a species that once considered itself untouchable now approaching humanity for protection. I will relay your request to Earth, Command, I say, though I would note, Delegate Voreth, that any guarantees extended to the Athari Concord will depend heavily on how your government positions itself during the negotiations ahead. Earth is not interested in punishing every species that stood silent, but we are equally uninterested in extending goodwill to those who continue treating this moment as an inconvenience rather than a correction. She nods slowly, and for the first time since I have known her, I see something like genuine respect in her expression rather than practiced neutrality. Understood, Ambassador, she says. I will make certain my government understands the distinction. She departs down the corridor, and I watch her go, aware that within the hour, similar conversations are likely happening throughout the station. Delegates who spent years assuming humanity would remain quietly beneath them, now scrambling to renegotiate their position before the ground shifts entirely beneath their feet. Grace rejoins me once Voreth has disappeared around a corner. That is the third delegate who has approached station staff privately in the last hour, she says. Word is spreading fast that the old council alliances are no longer guaranteed to hold. I think of Threll's calm, unshaken confidence 7 days ago, his certainty that humanity's ultimatum would end in quiet surrender, and I feel something settle in my chest that I have not felt in years of service to this station, something close to satisfaction, though tempered carefully by the knowledge that this crisis is far from resolved. We should return to the embassy wing, I say. Earth will want a full report on what just happened, and Admiral Winters will need every detail if she intends to manage what comes next. As we walk, I notice something shift in the atmosphere of the station itself. Delegates moving with less certainty than usual, staff members exchanging uneasy glances, the entire structure of a place that has stood as an unquestioned seat of authority for centuries, now vibrating with an uncertainty it has likely never experienced before. We pass near the central observation deck, and I pause, drawn by a small crowd of delegates and staff gathered near the wide viewport, staring out at the Terran fleet, still holding its patient, silent formation in the dark beyond the station. No one speaks. They simply watch, and I recognize in their expressions the same disbelief I felt 3 days ago, staring at star charts that rewrote everything I thought I understood about my own species. Among the crowd, I notice Threll standing slightly apart from the others, his posture stiff, his gaze fixed on the fleet with an intensity that suggests he has been standing there for some time. I approach carefully, unsure whether he wants company, but curious enough to test the moment regardless. Delegate Threll, I say. He turns slowly, and the expression on his face is nothing like the calm certainty he wore 7 days ago. It is something quieter, more contemplative, the expression of someone reevaluating decisions he believed were unshakable. "Ambassador Marsh," he says, "I find myself in an unfamiliar position. In 3,000 years of service to this council, I have never once been forced to reconsider an assessment this thoroughly, this quickly." I say nothing at first, giving him space to continue, sensing that whatever he says next matters more than anything spoken during the formal session. "We assumed your species required correction," he continues, his gaze returning to the fleet. "We assumed isolation would keep you contained, manageable, easily governed by terms we set without your input. I see now that assumption was not merely wrong. It was the very thing that allowed you to become this. I consider my response carefully before speaking. Humanity did not build this fleet to seek revenge for how we were treated, Delegate Threll, I say. We built it because your council left us no other path toward being taken seriously. If the council had extended equal partnership 60 years ago, perhaps none of this would have been necessary." Threll is quiet for a long moment, and when he finally speaks again, his voice carries something I never expected to hear from him, something close to genuine regret. "Perhaps," he says, "though I suspect the council would not have believed such partnership was warranted. Not then, and if I am honest, Ambassador, not entirely even now. Old assumptions do not dissolve as quickly as fleets appear in orbit. It is, I think, the most honest thing he has ever said to me, and I find myself respecting the admission more than I expected to. Then perhaps this is where real negotiation begins, I say. Not with demands, but with both sides finally willing to say what they actually believe." Threll studies me for a long moment, and something in his expression shifts, not quite warmth, but no longer the distant condescension I grew used to over 4 years of service. "Perhaps," he says again, quieter this time, "I will need to consult with the full council before any formal proposal can move forward. But I suspect, Ambassador Marsh, that the terms discussed in the coming days will look very little like the ultimatum I delivered 7 days ago." He departs, and I remain at the viewport a moment longer, watching the fleet hold its patient formation, watching delegates, who once dismissed humanity, now standing in quiet, uncertain clusters, forced to reckon with a future none of them anticipated. Grace steps up beside me, following my gaze toward the fleet. "It does not feel finished," she says quietly. "It is not," I agree. "But it no longer feels like we are the ones waiting for permission to matter." We turn from the viewport together, and as we make our way back toward the embassy wing to prepare Earth's next report, I allow myself, for the first time since arriving on this station 4 years ago, to imagine what a truly equal seat at that table might actually look like. I suspect the council is about to learn that humanity intends to find out. 3 weeks pass before the council reconvenes in formal session, and in that time, the station transforms into something I barely recognize. Where once the corridors moved with the slow, unhurried certainty of an authority that never questioned its own permanence, they now hum with constant activity, delegates rushing between private meetings, staff coordinating logistics for negotiations that have grown far larger than anyone initially expected. Word of the Terran fleet spread quickly beyond this single station, reaching every corner of Council territory, and with it came a wave of requests, some cautious, some desperate, all of them aimed at understanding exactly what humanity has become and what that transformation means for everyone else. I spend those 3 weeks in near constant communication with Earth, relaying proposals, clarifying terms, watching Admiral Winters and a growing team of Terran diplomats build something none of us fully anticipated when this crisis began. Not a demand for dominance, but a framework for genuine partnership. Grace works alongside me through nearly every waking hour, and more than once I catch her staring at the fleet through the embassy wing's viewport with an expression I recognize easily, because I have worn it myself more times than I can count these past weeks. Quiet disbelief that has slowly settled into something steadier, something closer to pride. On the morning of the final session, I dress carefully, the same formal attire I wore 7 days before the fleet's arrival, though it feels entirely different now, no longer a diplomat's uniform worn while bracing for humiliation, but the uniform of someone about to help shape terms that will define humanity's place among the stars for generations. The chamber, when I arrive, looks the same as it always has, wide and ancient, built for beings far older than my own species. But the atmosphere inside it has changed completely. Delegates who once regarded me with barely concealed pity now watch my approach with careful, measured attention, some curious, some still wary, but none dismissive. Threll stands at the central podium once more, and as I take my place, he offers a small nod, an acknowledgement that carries more weight than any formal greeting could. The chamber quiets as the session formally opens, and I feel Grace's presence just behind me, steady and watchful, as she has been throughout this entire crisis. Ambassador Marsh, Threll begins, his voice carrying none of the cold authority it held 3 weeks ago. The Council has spent considerable time reviewing the events of recent weeks, consulting with member species, and reconsidering the terms originally proposed in our initial ultimatum. I will say plainly, for the record, that those terms no longer reflect the reality this Council must now acknowledge. A murmur ripples through the chamber, though this time it carries none of the mockery I remember from 7 days before the fleet's arrival. It is the sound of beings adjusting, slowly and carefully, to a truth they can no longer avoid. The Council formally withdraws its original demands, Threll continues. Humanity will not be required to disarm, will not be required to surrender its drive technology, and will not be placed under observation status. Instead, the Council proposes a new framework, one built on the principle of equal standing among member species, with full trade access, full diplomatic representation, and formal recognition of Terran sovereignty across all currently held territories. I listen carefully, and though the words match almost exactly what Admiral Winters and her team spent 3 weeks negotiating, hearing them spoken formally in this chamber, in front of every delegate who once dismissed humanity as beneath consideration, carries a weight I did not fully anticipate. Earth accepts this proposed framework, I say, my voice steady, as an appropriate foundation for future negotiation. However, Earth requires several additional provisions before formal ratification can proceed. Threll gestures for me to continue, and I feel the chamber's attention sharpen, delegates leaning forward slightly, aware that this moment will define the terms of coexistence for whatever comes next. First, I say, humanity requires a permanent seat on the Council's Central Governing Committee, with voting authority equal to any founding member species. Second, all existing trade quarantines and restrictions previously imposed on Terran vessels must be formally revoked, effective immediately. Third, any future disputes involving humanity must be addressed through direct negotiation rather than unilateral Council ultimatum, a process Earth intends to formalize through binding treaty rather than informal precedent. The chamber falls silent, and I watch several delegates exchange glances, weighing the weight of what I have just proposed. A voting seat on the Central Governing Committee is not a minor concession. It is, in effect, an acknowledgement that humanity has moved from the margins of this Council's attention to its very center, a position previously reserved only for the oldest, most established member species. Threll considers the proposal carefully before responding, and when he finally speaks, I hear something in his voice I never expected to hear, directed toward humanity, genuine respect. The Council will require formal deliberation on these terms, he says, but I will state my own position clearly, for the record. I believe humanity has more than earned this standing, not through the fleet currently positioned beyond this station, though I acknowledge its role in bringing this Council to the negotiating table, but through the patience and discipline your species demonstrated in building it without our knowledge, without provocation, and without ever using it as anything more than a demonstration of capability. That restraint speaks to something this Council failed to recognize in humanity for far too long. I feel Grace shift slightly behind me, and though I do not turn to look at her, I know she is feeling the same quiet astonishment I am, hearing Threll, of all delegates, speak these words aloud. The formal deliberation that follows takes the better part of the day, Delegates from each member species offering positions, some cautious, some enthusiastic, a few still visibly uncomfortable with the shift in power this moment represents. But by the session's end, the vote is decisive. Humanity is granted its seat, its trade access, its formal recognition as a sovereign power among the stars, not as a subject species finally permitted entry, but as an equal partner, whose absence from that table was, the Council now formally acknowledges, always a mistake. When the session finally closes, I remain standing at my place for a long moment, watching delegates disperse, watching the chamber slowly empty until only Grace and I remain, along with Threll, who lingers near the podium longer than necessary. He approaches slowly, and for the first time in 4 years, I see something in his expression that resembles genuine curiosity rather than practiced diplomacy. "Ambassador Marsh," he says, "I find myself wondering something, and I hope you will permit the question. Given the deception this council maintained toward your species and the treatment you personally endured across your years of service here, why did Earth choose restraint? Why demonstrate strength without ever threatening to use it?" I consider the question carefully before answering because it deserves an honest response. Because strength used only to demand fear is not strength worth having, I say. Humanity did not build that fleet to conquer this council. We built it because we refused to remain powerless while you decided our fate without us. Showing you that fleet was never a threat, Delegate Threll. It was an invitation to finally see us as we actually are, rather than as you assumed we would remain forever. Threll studies me for a long moment, and something in his expression settles into quiet acknowledgement. "I believe," he says finally, "that this council underestimated your species in nearly every possible way. I do not intend to repeat that mistake." He departs, and Grace steps up beside me as the chamber's massive doors close behind him, leaving us alone in the quiet, ancient space that has witnessed the shift of an entire galactic order in the span of a single afternoon. "It is over," she says softly, though I hear the question buried beneath the statement. I glance toward the chamber's wide viewport, where the Terran fleet still holds its position beyond the station, patient, steady, no longer a demonstration of what might come, but a quiet reminder of what humanity has already become. "It is beginning," I say. "Everything before this was preparation. What comes next, Grace? That is where humanity actually finds out what kind of power we intend to be." We walk together through the station's corridors one final time before returning to the embassy wing, and along the way, delegates who once looked past me now offer careful nods, small gestures of acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable 4 years ago. It is not warmth, not yet, and perhaps it will take generations before something like genuine trust develops between humanity and the species that once dismissed us so completely. But it is respect, earned rather than given, and for a species that spent 60 years building in silence, simply to be seen clearly, I find that more than enough to begin with. That evening, standing once more at the embassy wing's viewport, watching the fleet hold its patient formation against the endless dark, I send a final report to Earth, brief and simple, though it carries more weight than any transmission I have sent in 4 years of service. Terms accepted, seat secured. Humanity stands among the Council as an equal, not because they granted us that standing freely, but because we built ourselves into something they could no longer deny. The reply comes quickly, brief and warm, carrying Admiral Winters's steady confidence even through simple text. "Well done, Ambassador Marsh. 60 years of patience finally spoke for itself. Rest now. The next chapter begins tomorrow." I close the transmission and stand quietly at the viewport a while longer, watching the fleet, watching the stars beyond it, thinking of every delegate who once looked at humanity with pity, and every one of them now forced to look again, more carefully this time. The Galactic Council spent 10,000 years assuming they understood every species worth knowing. Humanity spent 60 years proving them wrong, not through conquest, not through violence, but through patience, discipline, and the quiet, unshakable determination to never again accept being told what we were allowed to become. I think, as the station's lights dim into its evening cycle and the fleet continues its silent watch beyond the viewport, that this is only the beginning of what humanity intends to build, now that the stars finally see us for exactly what we are. Equals. Nothing less.